Primary. Tell 5th, 6th, and 7th period.
Man, I got this swag. My hat matching my bag. You know I'm poppin' tag.
Alright, in all seriousness, good afternoon.
Man, I got this swag.
This is your agenda today. Even though it says Tuesday, it will be on the board when you guys come in. Go to Google Classroom and complete the survey. Some of you have already completed this. It was over the You Choose Friendship Survey. Complete MemBeam, 10 minutes. Quiz on Friday. And these are the questions. The main one you need to focus on today is what is a primary source versus a secondary source. And I'm going to pass this off to Evan to record. Here you go. You're recording it. You're not on it. You're good.
I don't want to be on it.
Okay. You guys go to page 170. On 171, there is some space to put a chart. T-chart on 170. 171. And you need to label it primary and secondary. When you were in elementary school, was that primary school or secondary? Primary. And then secondary is high school, what you are in now. So you need to put for primary first, secondary, just like the word second, comes second. Let's do this. How to set it up. Now record. And you will also use maybe some video clips and create a presentation on the civil rights. Everybody will be given yours later this week and who you're working with. But first, you have to have a primary source and a secondary. Therefore, you need to know what a primary source is versus a secondary. So clicking through this. Whoa, just kidding. Hot mess. It feels like a Monday. First time, like a primary, when you were in primary school. First time through. So first-hand information. That's why I told you to put first. First-hand information. These were the people who wrote or produced it, and they were in the moment. Lived it, breathed it, wanted it, needed it, etc., etc. So when Miss Adcock, first day of school, took these pictures up here and posted them, that would be a primary or a secondary.
Primary because you were there.
Primary. But if I go to the copy room right now, make a copy, and I start writing comments around it about your personalities, about your progress, it now is a secondary or a primary source. It's secondary now because I'm making comments based off of the primary source. The first time it is a primary. Second time, like if I make, if someone is writing about the primary source, if I made you write a reflection on that day and how far we have come from that day, day one, that would become secondary because you're writing about the first source. Gives you an idea about what people alive saw at that time. Go ahead right now and put this copy of the list. Here are examples. A diary and a journal. The list is up here. So on your T-chart, under primary sources, you need to list all the words in red. So all the words in red. A diary and a journal, because that is someone's first-hand account of in that moment, what they felt, what they saw. Primary. But what if I ask you to read someone's journal and write a summary? The summary becomes a secondary source. Why is an autobiography a primary source? What's autobiography? What makes it different than a biography?
Because it's you. The person who's writing was originally there.
Yes. An autobiography is you or the person writing their own story about their life. A biography is when someone takes primary sources and materials together, gathers their own information, and creates the story. Like, it's not making it up, but they've just read a lot of different information about the person and created a biography, but it's not the first-hand account.
What's that one about? That's his.
Historical documents. Where can we find original historical documents? The library. Sometimes museums have like the actual first copy. In like, the glass boxes, they might have them, the original. Speeches. Historical documents and public records. So your birth certificate, the original copy, is a primary source. Sound recordings. Hey, I need y'all to be quiet because I'm recording this for another class to watch. Sound recordings and interviews, primary sources. During the Great Depression and World War II, television had not been invented, so people would sit around and listen to the radio. If we were to pull up today that radio announcement and listen to it, it's a primary source. Then, like today, now we have it televised. So if we watch, even though it was live, but if we go back and watch it, that will be the primary source. But what if we afterwards, so like President Trump right now, what's the big thing everybody's talking about?
The wall.
The wall, okay? So if we go watch an actual State of the Union address or something he's giving, and then later on, we go and watch people talking about it, like reading about it on, Facebook comments. Yeah. Everybody's talking about it. The Facebook comments are secondary. Commentary about the primary, because the primary would be his actual speech. Does that make sense? So if you're talking about or you're writing a review or a critique or something like that, that is going to be secondary. Because somebody reviewed and talked about and analyzed the first source. But the very first original copy is primary.
Get it, just explain.
Here's some examples of primary sources still. Letters. So if we have an old war letter, the actual one that someone wrote in the moment, that would be primary. Songs and poems, the original. But what about if we're looking at a song analysis of the lyrics? Would that be primary or secondary? Secondary. What is a secondary source? It is secondhand information. Something that was written about a primary. You might want to add that. It was something written about a primary source. It usually is done well after the event. So look at dates. Is it talking about something in 1930 in 2018? Because then it's definitely a secondary source. It helps you to interpret or evaluate that primary source. So look at this. To Kill a Mockingbird is the book you are reading. The book itself would be a primary source. How many of you know what SparkNotes is?
I heard of it.
SparkNotes. It's where you can go online and pick any classic novel, and it will give you analysis, summaries of each chapter. And it puts it usually in language that students can better understand. So if this is the primary, SparkNotes is the secondary, because it came from the original. But it's just a way to help us to interpret or evaluate this better. Here's some examples of secondary sources. So on the other side of the T-chart, you need to list these in red. They are also up here on the board. A biography. Because the biography, if Bernard wrote the biography of Miss Adcock's life, if he has an interview that he conducted with me telling him my story, is that primary or secondary? No. It's primary. But when you write from that interview my story, it's secondary. A history book, a textbook, would be considered second-hand information. But they used first-hand information to create the books. An almanac, encyclopedia, or a bibliography are secondary. How many of you can admit you don't know what an almanac is? Last year we had some people who didn't know. Because sometimes they will ask you, where would you most likely see this source? That's a typical EOC, CRCT type question. Where would you most likely see this? And sometimes an almanac is listed as a choice. An almanac contains predictions and weather patterns and whatnot. So sometimes like the Farmer's Almanac, it will show you like what this season's most likely going to be the weather patterns and all. It also contains geographic like facts about the area. Because this up here says Book of Facts. I think we need to get an actual almanac in here so you can go through and look at it. Because I think a lot of us, I haven't looked at one in years either. But an almanac would be considered a secondary source. But they probably use data from like the weather, like a meteorologist, you know, like a weather person. They probably use their data to create the almanac.
So an almanac is just weather machine.
Hmm?
And an almanac.
That's one of the main things people use it for, but I'm pretty sure there's other things in it. I just say we need to go look at an almanac. Books, magazines, and newspapers can be primary or secondary. How could you tell the difference? If this picture was taken right here, let's look. If this picture was taken in the moment, like live action, there was an accident on the scene that day and the reporter was there and took this picture, is that primary or secondary? Primary. But this picture of an old warship, and this is done in 2018, this picture's from 1908, I don't know, I'm just making up a date. Is that going to be secondary or primary? Secondary. So I said look at dates. That also will help you to decide if it's primary or secondary. Let's practice. Called quiz. It's like a quiz. You can turn that off now.